This is the Almost Awakened podcast, a no-nonsense approach to spirituality with your hosts, Brittany Hartley and Bill Reel. Here we dive deep into the wisdom traditions while acknowledging insightful breakthroughs in science, psychology, and human development. Our goal is to explore the good life and the very best of spirituality. No nonsense required. Check us out at almostawakened.org, where you can check out past episodes, make a donation, email us a question or comment, or find out more about the resources we shared. And now, today's podcast episode.
All right. Britt Hartley, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Bill?
Good. How's life treating you?
Good. I went down a rabbit hole this weekend.
I know. I got you started on this, didn't I?
Oh my gosh, Bill. And I sent you so many messages. I probably just filled up. I had so much fun one morning. What I did is last week we were talking about ChatGPT, or maybe it was the week before. And, for the religion that we come from, it was conference weekend. And so I just started playing with it. And I started asking ChatGPT to answer as historical people. So Christopher Hitchens or Buddha or historical Jesus. And it was so fun. And my favorite one was asking historical Jesus, okay, you come down for general conference. What do you say to the Mormons as historical Jesus? Yeah. And it was two things. It was inclusivity specifically to the LGBTQ community. And then, look inside your hearts and really determine if you're using your money in the way that I would have on my life on earth, and giving money to the poor and all of that. And I was and then you read it like it was a talk. And I was that is the best conference talk I have ever heard. So I had an uplifting weekend with ChatGPT talking to some of my favorite. By ignoring the
actual conference and listening to artificial intelligence Jesus.
Yes.
Right,
artificial intelligence Jesus and artificial intelligence Buddha gave me a super inspiring weekend. I really enjoyed. In fact, I might add on the podcast, asking maybe some wisdom teachers from different time periods what they would say about something, and include it on the podcast, because it was just a fun little rabbit hole.
It might be nice to ask questions and have it be the voice of unhealthy, unwise voices, and see what they say, and see what kind of people in our world those voices are closest to.
Ooh, that's a good one too. I didn't even think about that. Now I'm going to waste another morning asking Hitler about stuff, or I don't know. But super excited for today's podcast. Today's podcast episode, our guest comes to us from TikTok. And it was actually super sweet of her. I had posted something and she stitched it. And of course, on my small following, I got a couple thousand people to watch it. But on her huge platform, so many people watched one of the videos that I posted, and I was so honored. And so I, clicked on her and I went through her content and found that this is a super interesting person that I would love to talk to. And so without further ado, if you're ready, I think we'll welcome on.
Here we go.
Jordan the Grey Witch.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on the show. And hopefully some people who are on TikTok maybe recognize you. But we're super excited. Yeah, you have a pretty big following there, girl.
It's a new thing. It's a new thing for me. This all happened in under a year. So now I'm recognizable, and that's strange, but I'm getting used to it.
You get people who will now see you out and about and recognize you?
I don't go out a lot. I'm kind of an introvert, strangely, right? So I don't go out quite a lot, but yes, it's happened, and it's a little jarring when it happens, because you're not really sure. I get so much negativity online, but so much positivity in person. So it's kind of you're a little bit, you're uh-oh, is this going to be a troll, or is this a nice person? But it's been nice so far. So hope it stays that way.
So what I would love to start with, because one of your taglines is that you were an atheist witch, and instantly I was tell me everything.
So, there's a journey to tell, huh?
Yes. Yeah. So I really want to, if you could just start with your early faith experience, spirituality, religion experience, and how you kind of came to be TikTok's Atheist Witch.
Oh man, sure. Okay, so I would have to say I have to start from the beginning. I was adopted by my maternal grandparents. So even though I was exposed to my biological parents throughout my life, sort of on weekends and holidays, I was raised primarily by them. So on the one hand, I had my grandparents who were, my grandmother was Christian and my grandfather was atheist. And then my father's family were strict Roman Catholic. So I had pulls of Christianity from both sides, but my grandfather was the smartest person that I knew. So when he would explain things in a way that I could understand, because especially being a little neurodivergent child, I never stopped asking questions. And the thing is that from both aspects, from the religious standpoints, they couldn't answer my questions, but he could. So that made sense to me. So even though I would say in my younger years, I had a belief in God, but no longer than I had a belief in Santa Claus, so sort of after that age, when I realized, oh, this is nonsense, that the God belief sort of went out with that. And I would say throughout my teen years, I dabbled in Wicca and things like that, like delving into, I guess, what will be considered now as like more of the neo-paganism. But I never really had a belief in deities as in actual entities. Like I understood the mythological aspect of them even as a young age. I have 3 deities tattooed on me, but more so because I love mythology and what they represent, specifically for feminine empowerment. Like all 3 of them are very much divine feminine goddesses. So I would say in my younger age, even though I came from that religion, it just never, they tried. I actually got kicked out of Catholic school when I was 5 for asking the nuns too many questions. So that's kind of how my spiritual journey went.
And
but I was
so
full-blown atheist.
Okay, so
full-blown atheist in high school.
Atheist came to you early, and then you just continued to explore and found benefits to rituals and myth and some of these stories, but you kept your skepticism through the whole way.
Yes, they're separate. And I think a lot of people get confused about that because I would say most witches, the majority of witches have sort of like a neo-pagan or Wiccan background. So when I come out and say, well, I'm an atheist, but I still practice witchcraft, people are like, well, who do you pray to? And I'm like, well, I don't pray to anybody. But I'm a firm believer that witchcraft is more so just really spicy psychology for the most part, and self-care and going through rituals, which I think people get the term ritual is kind of scary for them. But a birthday party is a ritual. So things like that are totally applicable in our day-to-day lives. We can utilize those, especially in, ways of growing and especially self-healing. I've used it to heal myself for decades now. I'm 37. So
I want to ask, Britt, you've got this in the outline, but I want to maybe ask this a different way. So most of the folks in the audience, their experience when hearing the word witch, they're thinking like Wizard of Oz, right? And
yeah,
essentially the stereotype of what a witch is in movies and cartoons, when in reality, obviously it's something very different. So kind of a 2-part question. What is it that makes the word witch mean something common throughout time, and how is the role in which you see yourself as a witch different than maybe the stereotype or how it's portrayed throughout modern history?
So I think the witch, especially portrayed throughout modern media and history, is sort of always a negative connotation, right? It's always the bad guy. It's always sort of the old woman. They're ugly. They're cruel. They're evil. They're going to get your children. All these things, and Hollywood has run with that and perpetuated that for the centuries. But in reality, a witch is just somebody that sort of walks a different path, that maybe walks on the periphery of society, stays to themselves, heals themselves, grows their own food, things like that. More of a person of nature than anything, as opposed to sort of like this evil woman that wants to eat your babies, And I think that's, a pretty young girl who lives in the forest and grows her own herbs and makes her own tinctures isn't quite as entertaining Hollywood style as sort of the Wicked Witch of the West that flies around on a broom and has monkeys. I think that's far more entertaining for a media value. But in reality, there are so many witches out there, and to consider yourself a witch, I think a lot of witches consider it coming out of the broom closet the first time you call yourself a witch. And it can be something that's really empowering, because to be a witch, especially with certain religions, I would say it's the worst thing you can be, because especially within the monotheistic religions, being a woman is already the worst, right? Being an evil or portrayed evil woman, or a woman that's different, intelligent, any of these things is even worse. So by calling yourself this thing, you're re-identifying that term and claiming it for yourself and bringing power back to it in a place where it was considered derogatory, which is why I love it, because when my name is Jordan the Grey Witch, it pisses off all the right people.
You do ruffle some feathers there on TikTok. So there's a couple words that have kind of been brought up, and you do have some content talking about kind of the differences between paganism and witches and Wiccan, and how these kind of Venn diagrams overlap. So can you maybe share some of that content about some of these words that get mixed into this space?
Sure. So, being a witch can mean so many things depending on which witch you're talking to, right? So, and by the way, anyone of any gender can practice witchcraft or consider themselves a witch, identify as a witch. They may or may not practice magic. Not all of us do. Like I said, I more consider witchcraft as spicy psychology and a way to self-heal. Not unlike meditation, not unlike any other ritual practices, things that people do, they make themselves feel better. And even, is applicable even in certain religious contexts as prayer, right? Certain things that you can do. I would say that for a lot of the witchcraft, it's vastly different depending on, again, which sect you're sort of practicing from. So if you want to get started with sort of the Wiccans, not all witches are Wiccans, but all Wiccans are witches, right? So it's sort of like the Catholic Christian thing. It's sort of overlapping, and I would say most of the modern witches would be considered like the neo-pagans, right? New pagans, they believe, and paganism is just a belief in more than one deity. And I would say most of the witches that I know and follow, and vice versa, they believe in several deities, and they may practice to them, they may emulate them, they may use them within their practices, when they're going to practice, certain days are associated with certain deities, things like that. But again, it's different with every single witch and every single practice, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I have to share. So my first experience with a witch is I went to kind of organize this pagan night here with a witch, and she's this older lady, and she's like this grandmother Willow, right? She's like this archetypal wise woman, and her hair is actually all gray. And we went in a circle, and it was like a full moon ceremony, and we were walking, and I got into this like trance state, like without any, like no drugs or anything like that. And I got into this kind of trance state, and then the moon came out, and she was, of course, some of us younger ones who were just leaving Mormonism kind of felt uncomfortable with our bodies. And she was under the moonlight and dancing as if no one was watching. And it was truly one of the most beautiful and feminine, powerful moments of my life, just watching this old woman dance under the moon as if no one was watching, without caring about what her body looked like, right?
Yes.
In that moment.
So important. It's such an important aspect.
It was so sacred, and it's a tender memory of mine, and I really enjoy her, and I stay in contact with her. And some of the things, like, some of when I talk to her, we've done tarot readings before, some of it gets a little too woo for me, and I have to maybe retranslate some things in my mind. But even sitting and we had a cauldron, and everybody lit an incense, and we just set an intention for what the next season of our life we wanted to be. And we would say a word, and we would put our incense in the middle. And so it was all these women with all these, incense sticks. And it was powerful, even like you're saying, even without any supernatural involvement. Yes. For me, I wasn't believing that anything metaphysical was going on.
Yes.
It was an incredibly powerful experience. And so can you speak a little bit more to how this has been a self-healing journey for you, and especially from the kind of divine feminine space? And I would love to know who your female tattoo or your deity tattoos are too.
So you want to do the tattoos first, or I'll tell you this, how it's a feminine empowerment. So I would say many women go through I guess what can be referred to as the wounded feminine, right? Especially under patriarchy, where we are taught to hate everything about ourselves, hate everything about our body. It doesn't matter if you're tall, if you're short, if you're big, if you're small, it's not right. And we are taught this systemically. from the time that we are very, very young. So I would say for me, discovering witchcraft and discovering the self-empowerment aspect of it, it healed a lot of those broken pieces in me, the pieces that I hated and resented because that's what I was taught to do. Hating certain parts about my body, not understanding why I felt the way that I did. And the more you delve into witchcraft, and especially just study it all, if you're getting, if any of the listeners are getting started, study it all, study everything, all the different goddesses, all the different practices and things that you can do to self-empower yourself, to love yourself. Because I would say without it, I don't know that I would still be here. I think it taught me how to really empower myself. And I say all the time on my channel, knowledge is power. The more you learn, the more powerful you become and the more powerful your words are, because you have the knowledge to back up what you're saying. And I think that a lot of women just have this sort of inherent insecurity about what they say, about the way they look, about their choices, because that's what we've been taught. And witchcraft is sort of the antithesis of patriarchy. It's the opposite of what they want. They want control. They want submission. Witchcraft is neither of those things. It is empowerment. It is dominance. It is self-love. And I wish more people understood that. I think they all think that we're like these crazy ladies flying around on brooms and that we want to, hurt kids and stuff. It's just not the case. We want to love ourselves and be one with nature and with our own psyche in a healthy way. And it's pretty much saved my life more than once. Oh, and the goddesses. So I have Bastet and Sekhmet, both Egyptian, on these sides. Bastet was essentially the goddess of the home, women, protection, things like that. Sekhmet was her sister. She was a little bit more aggressive. She was said to grow the head of a lioness and roar into battle and bite men's heads off. So they essentially stand for protection and vengeance. And then I've got Artemis over here, the goddess of the hunt. She's always been the one that stood out to me the most. The story of her and Orion is one of my favorite in Greek mythology. So that's why I have Orion on the other side too.
Love it.
Yeah.
As you're sitting here listening, it certainly makes a lot of sense that, again, in patriarchy and in religious constructs, that any female who kind of became her own authority and just wasn't going to tolerate the nonsense that was part of the society would certainly be pushed back against. And so the idea that in the modern world we have turned witches, which was some sort of feminine power and strength, into ugly old ladies who eat children, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
It seems like it's almost a form of alchemy. And what I mean by that is that you essentially are taking control of your life and you're now turning things into something else, right? Like you're
Absolutely.
taking what it was that you were handed and making something else with it. So I thought that was interesting. And somebody here had a question. I want to make sure this got answered. Carlton says, does your atheism imply a lack of belief in the supernatural in general, or simply a lack of belief in the Christian God while maintaining a belief in other supernatural beings or events? Or I would even say like supernatural magic, right? Because part of the stereotype is that witches have access to real supernatural magic, not alchemy magic. And I don't mean like turning tin into gold, but turning things in your life into something better and more strong, right?
Yes.
Powerful.
So thank you for your question, Carlton. It's actually a good one I get all the time. So personally, I have no belief in any deity or anything supernatural that can't be explained by science. So that's just me. Anything paranormal just means out of the norm, right? And so I think when people ask, do you believe in the supernatural? Do you believe in the paranormal? Most of the time they are asking, well, do you believe in ghosts? Do you believe in things like that? And to believe in ghosts, you must believe in the concept of a soul, which is a religious construct. So for me, the concept of a soul is really just sort of, I would say, the amalgamation of our consciousness and our personal experiences. I don't believe that there's this sort of non-corporeal essence that's inside of us that once our bodies die, it floats off into some other place. There's no science that supports this. So for me, until there's data that can support something like that, it's just not something that I entertain. It's more of a residual religious construct, the idea of a soul. If I don't believe in a soul, how can I believe in a ghost, which would essentially be the disembodied soul of a deceased human? So I don't believe in things like that. I think that's where people get, misconstrued. And as for the term magic, I think, as in like a magician's magic, that's sleight of hand, that's smoke and mirrors, things like this. So I don't believe in anything like that. I believe that every human has the power to self-heal, and our psyche is a powerful thing. So by utilizing that psyche and by, again, gaining knowledge is power. The more we learn, the more we grow, and the more we can self-heal ourselves. And whichever route you may take to do that, as long as you're not hurting yourself or anyone, I think it's a good thing. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
cool.
the Bill and I do a lot of it's continually what we're trying to do is we tend to be more science atheists, but we're trying to dig out these tools.
Such as ritual.
That we've talked about many times before, to say, hey, there's actually tools here in the rubble of religion that people are leaving behind, that, hey, can we repurpose these tools in a way that you don't have to be intellectually dishonest, but in a way that's helpful for your life? So we're all about that. And I have another question for you. Our audience is just super curious about you. So I want to make sure that we get to most of these. Steve, Arizona, is there 20 plus types of witches, maybe more? Why did you select gray?
That's a great question, Steve. Thank you. Firstly, everybody asks this as well. I do have a video on my TikTok that I explain this, but I'll sort of reiterate here. So for me, gray essentially means magic and witchcraft is often, two categories, right? They usually say white magic and black magic, which is extremely problematic. So for me, gray is the combination of both, because like nature, witchcraft is both. There's neither good nor bad. It's just our existence. So for me, I really sort of, I guess gray meant mainly meant the most for me, because again, nature is both of those things, depending on which side of the spectrum, because I quote Morticia Adams all the time on this, and that's what is normal for the spider is chaos for the fly. So it really just depends if you consider yourself the spider or the fly. I think I've always kind of considered myself a spider, but also gray witch, because I've got a ton of gray hair, like a ton of gray. I don't know if you guys can see. I'm literally a gray witch, or I will be once I get a little bit more into my crone phase.
Yeah. And we were talking off air for a second about, I have some clients who are starting their gray journey as really a part of female empowerment, that because there is this thing, especially under patriarchy, that because women need to be at home and be mothers and be sexually available to their husbands, you have to always look as if you are sexually ready to have a baby. You need to perpetually be 25. And that once you are not 25, you're essentially useless to the community, right?
Well, that's because under patriarchy, our worth is determined specifically on our physicality. And that's such, bullshit. Because women we're like wine, baby. We get better as we age. And that's what the patriarchy doesn't want you to know. They want to keep women submissive, young. Oh, you're only valuable if you're young and pretty. And then you have no value to society once you get older, when that's simply, it couldn't be farther from the truth. Some of the older women, like the woman you were describing, she sounds like a badass. Like,
yeah. And she like built up to it for like 2 years. She's coming out of Mormonism as an older woman, and her turning gray is essentially her rejecting, I don't need to try to be 25 anymore. I have actually a lot of wisdom as a 60-year-old woman, that I'm not going to try to pretend that why am I trying to pretend that I'm 25? I'm so much more smart than I was when I was 25. I have so much more to offer than when I was 25. In fact, whenever I drive down to Utah, from here to Utah, if I were to go visit Bill, it would essentially, I hit a certain part of Utah from the religion that we came from, which was Mormonism, which is heavily patriarchal. And you hit a certain like Mormon line as soon as you get to Utah, where all of the billboards are just, get your boob job here, get your Botox. Like, do you know what I'm talking about, Bill? Like when you drive into Salt Lake, and all it is just like 20-year-old looking women just on billboards forever. And it's just like, whenever I drive down there, it's just like, oh God, like make it stop.
But those women make me sad. And I'm not at all talking against, cosmetic procedures. If you want to do something to your body, it's your body, your choice. do it, babe, but do it for the right reason. Do it because it's going to make you feel better. Don't do it because you think that other people will like you more. Don't do it because you're trying to fight aging. You can't fight aging. We're all mortal. We all age and we all die. And that's the thing, is I feel that so many women fear getting older because they fear that they'll be less valuable. They fear that they'll be less attractive. And patriarchy teaches us that they won't matter anymore. And I want to change that. I want to have women growing out their gray. I want women to show their wrinkles and show their crow's feet and show that they don't have boob jobs. And that's okay, that they're still beautiful and they're still valuable. And if not, more so, if possible.
Yeah.
You said something a little bit ago about black magic and white magic, and you kind of said like that's more complex than that. And I want to ask you about that. So Britt and I just talked about in the last week or two the book The Four Agreements by Miguel Ruiz.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about black magic and white magic. The idea that if we go up to an individual and say, you have an ugly voice, and they believe it, now we've done black magic, right?
Yes.
And white magic, and I don't like the color idea
Right.
of assignment, but the idea that if you lift people up and you give people a better story that is beneficial to them, then you're performing magic, which is healthy and helpful. And black magic is anything that tears people down and
Yes.
lowers self-esteem or causes people to feel pressure to make unhealthy choices. And I just wanted to get your perspective on anything else you wanted to add in terms of the complexity of just splitting it out, the binary idea of splitting it out into just white magic and black magic, and what you have to say that does speak to it being more complex than that.
It would definitely be more complex than that. And I've read the Four Agreements, so I know what you're talking about. But I would say by separating it to a binary, is that everything's white and everything's dark, we can sort of separate the binary of everything's good and everything's evil. And as we know, these things are subjective. They are not objective. It really depends who you're speaking to. And our words carry value. Our words carry weight. They are powerful. So if you say something to one person and say the exact same thing to somebody else, it may seem cruel to one and may seem good to the other. So I think by painting things with just a black and white brush, we're really limiting our understanding of just how powerful our words can be. And again, they are subjective depending on who we're speaking to. So that's kind of why I consider myself gray, because the neutrality of this world and of nature, the sort of the divine essence of nature is neutral when it comes down to it. And again, it just depends who you ask, the killer whale or the seal.
Yeah.
Mm.
Depends on the day, huh?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask about, so sometimes Bill and I were pushing against religion, or we push against things that are unhealthy, but we also sometimes have to call out like our own camp, in a sense that, we'll call out maybe atheism can sometimes act like a religion, or, maybe we lean left politically and we have to call out some aspects of that. So if you were to have to like turn to kind of the camp of witches, what are some things that you see that are either spiritual bypassing or things that you think are psychologically unhelpful, or pitfalls as people are trying to understand this place?
Well, I will say, especially within the neo-pagan community, there's a lot of spiritual bypassing. You'll see a lot of people sort of nowadays, and even bigger influencers will say things like, oh, you're a star seed, or you're a divinely awakening. And the person is literally describing the symptoms of psychosis. And they're like, you're clairvoyant. So there are a lot of problems when it comes to, I would say, pretty much any religion and belief, but certainly within the spiritual communities now, we're seeing a lot of bypassing when it comes to actual psychological disorders and things that should be treated by a professional, that are sort of being like, oh, we'll just pray about it. It's the same when the church tries to pray the demons out of you. You can't just ask your tarot cards if you are literally schizophrenic. Things like that are very, very problematic. So I do see a lot of that happening within the community that does concern me. Maybe I should make some more content about that. That's actually a good question.
Yeah, and I just want to note, somebody said that I think magic is irrational. Yes, in terms of supernatural, I do think magic is irrational, but I think the way we're talking about it, it's not supernatural at all. It's the idea that you fill the world with stories that help everybody to be happier, healthier, and have a better well-being. And so I wanted to ask you, in terms of the rituals and things that you carry out, we'll say spells, and I'll just use the binary term. What does the white magic rituals look like? Like, what does it mean for you as a witch to try to make the world a better place within that label?
I would say within white magic, I'm finding out recently that my voice is a pretty strong one of my powers. So I try to use that, especially on my platform, to try and empower people, try and help people. And even in very small contexts, I think people think I'm burning candles and calling the corners and things like that to cast a spell. But you can literally see someone walking down the street that looks like they're maybe not having a good day. And you can say, hey, you know what? You look awesome today. And I really like your shoes. And you can keep walking. And that is a good spell. That is casting positivity into someone's life who maybe hasn't heard it before. So things like that, I try to do, especially when I'm feeling down. If I'm having a bad day, I try and find someone who's having a worse one. And then I say something to make their day better. And I wish more people would do that. Because if you can see, someone say like, oh, wow, you just made my whole day. If that's not magic, then I don't know what is.
That's a good tagline. I want to put that on a poster somewhere. Can you give us a sense of any more personal rituals that just kind of support your sense of spirituality? So what does spirituality mean to you? What are personal rituals that continually, help you to connect to nature and your highest self and other, and give us a sense of that?
So I think the word spirituality is for, in English, of course, for lack of a better word. So since I don't necessarily believe in the aspect of spirit, I would say, again, this is more like the embodiment of my consciousness, plus my personal experiences. So sort of, genetics, nature, and then versus environmental factors, nurture, that creates like who we are, our individuality, and our who we are as people, right? So I would say for me, my rituals, I used to do like spells and stuff all the time, especially when I was in my teens. I would, light the candles, things like that. If people say they're having a rough time, I'll light a candle for them. It makes them feel better. I've had people ask me, can you light a candle for me? And I say, sure, baby, what color? What color do you want me to light for you? Will that help? And then I light it and I take a picture of it and I send it to them. And that makes them feel better. And again, this is positive magic. This is positive reinforcing somebody, to let them know that you care, to let them know that you love them. But in more of aspects of ritual within nature, grounding. Have you heard of grounding? It's when you take your shoes off and put your feet in the dirt or the sand or the grass or the water and reconnect literally physically with the earth. And I don't know whether I was raised a feral little child, always running around without any shoes on. But that really centers me. And that's sort of a ritual that I need to do to center my brain. So a lot of people say, oh, I need to go to the gym, or I need to meditate weekly, or I need to do my yoga. I need to ground myself. I need to be within nature, or else I lose my mind. So I think, I'm sure there are some listeners who will be like, I do that too. That can be considered a ritual. I think people really get hung up on that word and they think, oh, it must be a sacrifice. It must be evil. It must be scary. That's not the case. So I really want to try and sort of redefine what modern witchcraft is, and let people know that a lot of the things they are doing it might be witchcraft.
Speaking of, so last summer, my daughter fell out of the window, and it was, just a rough time for my family. And I had a witch friend light a candle and send me a picture. And she also drew a card for me and sent it to me. And again, like you, I didn't believe anything supernatural was going on. Even law of attraction, I'm like very skeptical of. But for me, it was so much more precious than someone saying, sending thoughts and prayers, because it was like this person took time out of their day. They lit something. It doesn't matter what the thing is. They took a picture just to show that I was really thinking of you in this moment. And she drew a card for me, and it gave my brain an opportunity to search for meaning, right? Because as soon as you get a card, your brain starts thinking, well, how can I fit this into the story? Your brain will just start to do that on its own, right? Spicy psychology.
Yeah.
And it was such a beautiful gift from this witch friend of mine that was more precious to me than sending thoughts and prayers, because it was this physical thing that she had sent me to show that she had spent a minute thinking about me instead of just typing out sending thoughts and prayers. And then she also gave my brain an opportunity to find meaning in this hard time that I was going through. And whether or not, I'm skeptical that the earth turned in such a way that it got that card and that kind of thing, but it was still a helpful exercise for me at the time, and a really, really beautiful gift from her, even without any supernatural beliefs on my part or really on her part.
Witches are excellent. Oh, sorry. Witches are excellent at transmutation. So sort of the idea of, he mentioned alchemy. Alchemy gave birth to modern chemistry. So transmutation, essentially, witches are very, very useful at transmutating our pain into our power. We are very good at transmutating our energy to someone else and sending it to somebody else, even if it's as simple as that card or things like that. We are able to encapsulate our energy and give it to somebody else in a meaningful way, when I feel that, you know, thoughts and prayers tend to be sort of like water off a duck's back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially for me, because it's like, well, you know, if you know me, then you know that I'm an atheist. So I'm not sure what you're trying to get me to feel here, but I'm not feeling it.
Right.
Well, I try to be compassionate as much as I can when someone says that, but still, that I don't remember those messages, but I certainly remember her text message to me during that time. Can you give us a sense of the voices that really help you to stay connected? Podcast, influencers, books that have really helped you to find things that resonate with you or that you've learned from?
When it comes to witchcraft, I would say probably not. I've discovered a lot of the stuff in here, just like following my own inner voice. But I would say people that I have followed for years that have really inspired me and sort of kept me on the path that I'm on are Bill Nye, Bob Ross, and Steve Irwin are my three favorites. And I think it's because they never gave up on people and they always wanted to help. And that sort of inspires me to always want to help in whatever way I can. And I'm different than them, of course, but we all are. So I think you just find your strength and heal yourself. And I'm a firm believer that hurt people, but healed people heal people. And it took me a long time to heal. And so now I want to help other people heal.
Oh, it's beautiful. I didn't catch this in the beginning. Maybe you said it. I know we talked about the idea of it, but when did you first call yourself a witch? And second is, you now have this presence online where you are incorporating these ideas into kind of a public voice that people are gravitating towards and finding benefit in. And I'd like to know a little more about like what that journey looked like in terms of you speaking up publicly and sensing that you had something to say, and then also folks that were listening, that there was something there that they wanted to hear, because obviously as you've grown, that says something about what you're saying is meaningful to the people that are listening.
Yeah, so I would say the first time I called myself a witch, I was 14. So I knew from a really young age that that's what I identified, and specifically that archetype, just that I'm different. I know it. There's no fighting against it. And this was during a time, you have to remember, in like the late 90s, sort of like the craft era, like being a witch was very much popularized at this time. So it was less sort of detrimental for me to say these things. People still looked at you like you're a loon, but it was less detrimental for me to say these things than, let's say, the 50s, 60s, 70s, where it was like absolutely faux pas. But I would say, you know, my journey on social media has been swift and overwhelming at times, but super, super fulfilling. The first video I ever made on TikTok went viral. And I woke up to 30,000 followers after one day. And I was like, oh my goodness, what has happened, right? And then when I started making videos, speaking in them, I got a really positive response from a lot of women. So my following is primarily women, because you can see in the analytics, right? You can see like who follows you, and it's primarily women. And I had a 10+ year modeling career where I was dealing with just men and lots of negative comments from men. We don't get a good, even though people are telling you how pretty and how hot you are, you get the absolute dregs of the internet when you're a model. So I hadn't been used to that, to getting praise from women. And I think that really inspired me to be like, oh, wow, like this is really cool. Like, you know, I didn't want to really be on the internet anymore. I didn't anticipate on going viral. That I certainly didn't anticipate on having the platform that I have. But c'est la vie, you know, things happen, and here we are. And the fact that I get thank you messages every day from people that say, wow, you really helped me. I no longer fear hell because of you. Because of you, I was able to stand up to my Christian family who abused me. Because of you, I was able to put into words things that I've been trying to explain for years. And now I can't stop because now it's not just me, it's for so many other people. And I owe that to them. I owe that to the little girl who's stuck in some podunk town, who's just like me, surrounded by a patriarchal, misogynistic Christian family who thinks that she's not worth anything. And she can look at my TikTok and know that she is. And that means a lot to me.
Yeah, love it.
I can hear it in your voice that means a lot to you. And so many of the witches that I know really are wounded healers, right? They were wounded first. And I think it was a solo episode that I did, Bill, on Chiron and the wounded healer, and that the place that you have the most capacity to do healing is the place that you were wounded. And so, a lot of what Bill does and what I do, and obviously what you do, is being the person that you needed at certain ages and giving messages that you needed to hear in your past. And that is a fulfilling life calling to do that kind of wounded healing work. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about TikTok, because you do get some pushback, specifically from what I'm seeing from religious men, which is the majority of pushback that I get as well. So can you give us just kind of the flavor of the various kinds of, continual pushback that you get and how that shows up in your inbox?
It's a lot of misogyny. I think it's a lot of unchecked narcissism for a lot of them. I mean, a lot of these men that come to my page and just spew this vitriol at me, they clearly have never been told no. They clearly have never been told to shut the hell up. And I'm happy to oblige. So I'm one of the people that, hey, if they want to come to bat with me, that's fine. But understand that I'm not one of the women that they're accustomed to. I'm not one of the women that's just going to keep my mouth shut and wash the dishes while they just blather on. So I get everything from, ad hominem, just like insults, to literal death threats. But hey, they say when you get death threats, it's because you're doing something right. But they're always from religious men, I will say. Almost always. And I, as much as I know about psychology, it's because I hit a nerve. It's because I hit something that they're insecure about, especially when it comes to their belief or their way of life. If I say something and you're mad about it, you have to ask yourself why, but you also have to have the knowledge to understand that you should be asking yourself why. And I fear that most of them don't have that knowledge. So they then attack me instead of attacking the feeling that made them feel that way.
Right. And does that, I feel like for me, when I get those messages that come in, it's like hellfire. Sometimes it's quoting a scripture at me as if I've never read the Bible and I'm actually kind of an expert in theology, as much as one can be. And I get some of that. But I also, it's tough because it usually is men. And the women will just say they'll sometimes say like, this one didn't resonate with me, but I don't get, it's like a different kind of vibe from women. Even though I'm not resonating with all women, they'll either just scroll on or they'll say, that video, some of your videos resonate with me and some don't. But it's not this kind of full on hellfire attack that I get from religious men, which is really interesting to watch. I think
it has a lot to do with, because a lot of people look at me and they go, oh, she's a girl I like to look at. And then they hear what I'm saying and they go, oh, I don't like what she's saying now. Right. And most of these people, like I said, when people see me out in public, I've never received something negative from somebody. I only get negative stuff online. And I think this has a lot to do with sort of the anonymity of the internet, where they, these basement dwellers are so emboldened by the anonymity of the internet that they can say all this asinine all these things that they would most of them would piss their pants if they walked up to me in person. I'm 5'9" and I always wear heels. I'm taller than half of them. So the idea that they think
that's such a delicious image in my mind. I had a visual that was just delicious.
Like, get out of here, like.
But for you, that's the funniest part. But for you, knowing the psychology of, if I'm hitting a nerve, it's because of something going on in your brain. Does that give you the ability to kind of handle the negative feedback?
Oh yeah.
Just by saying that's a you problem.
Yeah, I was also prepped for 10 years in the modeling industry of being told I was too fat, not too thin, too tall, not tall. They will tell you in the same day that you're two of the same thing. They'll say, "Oh, your eyes are too big. Oh, your eyes aren't big enough," and you'll hear that in the same day. So when you are scrutinized to every little detail about yourself, I think that really preps you to be on the internet. Because listen, being a content creator is not for everybody. It's certainly not. And I was not really prepared to be sort of plunged in. I have 220,000 followers now in less than a year. So I wasn't really like, there isn't a how-to guide on how to handle sort of mass, trolling from the public. But I would say that the modeling helped. It really helped prep me for that. And the psychology, of course, understanding that helps me as well. Sometimes I apply it. Sometimes I troll them back. Sometimes I use it as a teaching experience, if I even respond to them at all. Just depends how I feel that day.
Can we pull one of them up right now? So we've got one of these anonymous folks who he sometimes adds really helpful things to the conversation, and sometimes he's really pushing back, right? So I want maybe if the three of us could just spend a moment, because I think this is a great question. What he's saying, and because he's had other comments before this one, what he's saying is that why call it magic? Why not just call it human psychology? Why not just call it what it is? What is the usefulness in putting labels on it of witchcraft or magic or alchemy, for instance, when those words have these other meanings that are supernatural? Why give it supernatural language when it's really non-supernatural things going on?
I think that's actually an excellent question. Whether they're trolling or not, I think it's an excellent question. And my answer to that would be because we are pushing back against the systems that have repressed us. We are pushing back against misogyny and patriarchy. And terms like witchcraft and witch and alchemy and things like that piss off the right people. It makes you think. And even though witchcraft is just spicy psychology in my application of it, we're having this conversation because of it. So we are talking about these things, whether these people want to accept it or not. They're still learning, they're still listening, they're still understanding that these ideas, regardless of what word we may call them, have power. And I think that that's why I go by Grey Witch. Like I said, it confuses the right people. It pisses off all the right people. And it's sort of a conversation piece more than anything. And I also want to redefine what people think a witch is and what witchcraft is. So I think that's why.
For me, and I don't self-identify as a witch, but what I love about it is that it's pulling from a deeper history. So, I come from Mormonism, and there are many people who, specifically men, that will come at me and say, well, why didn't you stay? You're doing all this spirituality stuff over here. Why didn't you stay? And they don't sometimes understand that they're given more freedom to be in this nuanced, I can have my own opinion about things and stay in Mormonism. And that I, as a woman, was essentially not allowed to do that. By the time I was towards the end of my trying to make space for myself in Mormonism, I was not allowed to pray. I was not allowed to talk to the youth. I was stuff online. I was being called into the bishop's office. I was essentially silenced and muzzled in ways that men are usually not silenced. And so by using the word witch, it goes into something that is deeper than just Mormonism, that, hey, if I would have been alive in the 1600s, the 1400s, or the 1100s, I would still have been called a witch for saying things that were really pushing up against, not being the kind of woman that was idealized in these patriarchies, right? And so, so for me, using that language just gives life to a broader history than just my own experience being a woman in patriarchy, until I was silenced and essentially walked out because there was no space for me.
It's beautifully put and absolutely applicable. And because I would have been a witch too. They would have burned me. They would have burned me. Oh, they burned anybody that was smart, pretty, or different. I'd have been so burned, bro.
Yeah.
They would have.
As teenagers, I don't think either of us would have made it.
No
I was
way.
quite a spicy teenager. I was quite a rebellious teenager.
My day job is working with animals. I'm an animal behaviorist, and I can make a cat come without saying anything, just by eye signals. They would have burned me for that.
Yeah, you would have challenged the status quo in such a way that they would have felt threatened, and absolutely. And love both of your answers. My thoughts there is that I'm an atheist to the core. I don't believe in anything being supernatural. And I also call myself a mystic. And I find that when I talk to somebody who's willing to think about things in a new way, that when I use language that they've never heard before, it motivates them to be interested.
Exactly.
And so I think it's the way in which using words like magic or alchemy or mystic or mystery, it's the way I get people to slow down and begin to think a new thought. That's
the same application that I have with the word witch.
Yeah.
Even though it has come rooted in the fact that I've always identified with the archetype of witch, it provokes thought in all the right places and scares all the right people. And I think that that's important because, again, we're having this conversation right now because of it.
And the people who were pissed that you used the word magic because you're not really talking magic, aren't listening anyway, and it's not really for them to begin with.
Right. I mean, life is magic. Look around us, you know. I think every day, it really just depends on your application of magic. Am I pulling rabbits out of hats? No. Am I cursing ex-boyfriends? No. But, there's so many things, beauty in this world that I would consider magic. And again, making somebody smile in a way that they haven't, and you can tell, receiving the inboxes that I do from people, that's magic to me.
It reminds me, I made my 12-year-old son, read a book from Richard Dawkins that was written for teenagers called The Magic of Reality. And he uses that word magic because reality is so mysterious and so amazing and so mind-blowing, existence itself, that even Richard Dawkins, who is as far as on the atheist scale you could go, still used the word magic for the title of this book. Like, this is magic. But he was talking really about reality anyway, my kiddo liked that book. But for me, one of the most powerful things, going back to mythology, which is a place where I've learned so much about myself from Jungian psychology and from Greek mythology, because it's like it takes all of your brain and all the parts of human nature, and it kind of externalizes it to all of these gods, and you get to understand yourself. So for me, it was really powerful to be studying that in Mormonism and to see this archetype of old wise woman with, and she always, like you said, she had herbs and she was a healer and she was gray and she was not sexy, but she was powerful and she was wise, and this kind of grandmother willow. And you could see the archetype in movies and throughout history. And then to look at my own religion and see that there was no image of a wise woman like that in my religious tradition. And just the heartbreak of like wanting mother, at least in an image or a story or somewhere, and have it be not there. And I remember one time I was reading, this is like really early on in my kind of awakening journey, but I was reading scriptures that were talking about God, but they put it in the female pronouns. And I remember weeping and not really knowing why, because it was filling this space in me that I hadn't even put words to yet, that this witch, old woman, wise archetype that was truly missing in my religious tradition. Yeah. And to see words be put to it. And I just wept, and I really didn't even understand why I was doing it. But it was just so powerful. And then to, have to go outside the religious tradition to be able to find really more feminine ways of being spiritual, because spirituality was always modeled in the masculine.
Yeah, especially in the Abrahamic monotheistic beliefs, the divine feminine is completely written out, completely. And that's the thing. That's why the women in most of those religions are less than human in the eyes of the people who practice them. We are beneath a man in all aspects. And the thing is like my partner and I'm with a man, and we look at each other as equals. We're different, but we're equal. We need each other in different ways, and we help each other in different ways, and we care for one another in different ways. And I find that under these patriarchal religions, there's always something missing, because these men are then burdened with the weight that their women would be providing for them. They have to do everything, make all the decisions when women aren't afforded that choice. And the thing is when you actually let us help, you become more powerful. You both elevate. And I really wish that people could see this. And I think the world is waking up. I think they're understanding that women aren't just for breeding, although it's a beautiful thing if a woman chooses to become a mother, but that's not all that we are. We are much, much more than that.
I want to include, we're coming up on an hour and I don't want to take you too long, especially since you were ready for us earlier on.
It's okay. It's okay.
The time change. But this is a long time listener to the podcast, so I want to make sure I get his question. How does astrology fit into the worldview of a witch? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Sure. So I would consider astrology in the same category that I consider tarot. Now, while they're both a pseudoscience and not applicable in any type of scientific way, I think that they're very useful in psychological applications. So, for instance, astrology or tarot, if someone says to you, "Oh, what's your sign?" and you say, "Oh, I don't believe in that," that tells you so much about that person from a psychological standpoint. If they say, "Oh, I'm a Leo," then that also tells you a bunch about that person from a psychological standpoint. So I think in a social aspect, astrology is completely applicable to get to know somebody, whether they like that or not, whether they believe in that or not. That's telling you so much about them in one simple sentence. Now, when it comes to tarot, which again is sort of the same vein, tarot is also applicable in a psychological stance. So, if you pull up a card, it's the same as you're playing a deck of cards, right? Whether you believe that there is a metaphysical or supernatural aspect to tarot, I personally do not. But if you do, that's again applicable to your life, because if a certain card comes up, that may trigger something in your psyche that hasn't been triggered in a long time, maybe something that needs maintenance. So again, whether you're an atheist or whether you're a pagan or whatever you may practice, I think that both of these tools are useful in your life if you're searching for something. It can help you find them. And I think that if people looked at it with more of an open mind, as opposed to, "Oh, you're believing in demons and spirits," that's not the case. They're cards. It's how the stars are lined up. And as much as, our ancestors were studying the stars and how astrology is applied sort of historically throughout the world, right? We see constellations in the pyramids and things like that. That's all that they really knew about the world, was looking up to the night sky. So, as much as I'm a Pisces. I don't know how much how much they would like to say, but they're tools, guys. It's a tool to get to know our fellow human, and whether or not you may believe in that, just the same as if someone tells you they're a Christian. If someone says, "Oh, I'm a Taurus," that tells you about that person. It tells you what they're trying to share about themselves. And I find that to be very useful.
The listener who asked that question said, "I like her answer. Astrology and tarot are useful tools." So
yes,
he applauds the answer. I have, we're coming up on an hour here, and so I wanted to talk about sexuality for a second, because you push back in your content on sexual abuse in the church. It's one of the things that you're most willing to put your neck out to say, this is wrong, right?
Yes.
And sometimes you get sexually aggressive messages back, but you're also, I think, modeling healthy sexuality. Sometimes you have sexual posts, sometimes you'll post you and your partner, and they're sexy, right? So how
Sometimes.
are you? I think so. I think they're very sexy.
I just want to say, even like the images you sent for us to use in our promo image, like, they're more provocative than any other guest we've had.
They were from a dance shoot.
Yeah, and Britt and I had a conversation.
Those are the newest pictures I had.
I love it. Britt and I had this conversation, and we were both like, "Throw it on! Like, that's what she wants, and we want to let's do that." Super cool.
I wanted to ask how you're really just how you're navigating pushing back on sexual things, especially where in religion and the abuse that you're seeing, but then you're also kind of modeling healthy sexuality and sexuality as part of your feminine, and just kind of how do you handle all of that?
I think that every individual has their threshold of what they are comfortable with when it comes to expressing either internally or externally their sexuality. But what I promote and what I talk about the most, I would say, especially in pushback to religious abuse, is consent. It all boils down to consent. If I want to walk down the street with my top off, if I'm in a city that I legally can, that's my consent. whether you see me and you choose to sexualize me or not is your consent. So the idea that, some people may be more or less comfortable with their body, their physical body, or what they choose to share, that doesn't mean that they're not a sexual person. What I sort of want to promote is sort of that healthy expression of sexuality. And for some people, especially, in certain religions, women are completely covered, and that to them is empowerment, right? There are some women that wear nothing at all, and that's empowerment to them. So I would say to each individual, find where you feel comfortable, where you feel sexy. You become sexual when you are aroused, not when someone else is. That's the difference. So your sexuality is your own. Don't let someone commandeer it because they decided to sexualize you in a way that you don't consent to. If I'm walking down the street like this and someone wants to sexualize me, that's on them. It has nothing to do with whether I'm feeling sexual or not. It has to do with their perception of me and what they think sexuality is. So I think, and it took me, and I'm going to be honest, it took me a really long time to feel comfortable in my own sexuality. I was dealing with a lot of trauma. I was definitely seeking the wrong partners for a long portion of my life, trying to feel validated. And I felt the more that I tried to seek validation, the emptier I felt. So until I loved myself, I don't feel that I was loved in an appropriate way for most of my life, probably not until my 30s. And so I think now,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think now expressing that in the way that I do is sort of a fuck you to the people who ever sexualized me when I was younger. I started getting catcalled when I was 13, 14 years old.
Yeah, I remember this one piece of content you put out where someone was saying like, ew, you're not even attractive. You're not as curvy as I would want. And, and it was just such a ridiculous comment of just like, well, your body isn't the way that I find attractive, right? And so you had this kind of spicy answer of bringing up his picture, and it was a conventionally older, perhaps more unattractive man. And it was just like, oh, Jesus Christ. Just to like, hey, do you understand what you're sounding like?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you see what you're doing here? And I was in bed and I laughed out loud, and my husband was like, what are you watching? And I was like, I can't even explain this, but I found it very funny.
I like to spoon feed them their own medicine, because for me, the most surprising aspect of those comments is like, where are they getting the audacity? Because if I were the crypt keeper, the last thing I would be doing is commenting on some young girl's post and being like, 7 out of 10. Like, my guy, relax. And it doesn't even matter what you look like, because again, attraction is subjective. But I would never go to someone's page and comment negatively about their appearance, especially unsolicited. But I get them en masse every single day. So sometimes I just like to fling it back in their face.
The two things I think about when it comes to that idea of sex, one is that we were having sex long before we were human. This idea of what's appropriate or inappropriate, like all that's modern myth applied to these labels, right? And then the other idea I had too was that for the folks who are being like really, I kind of lost my train of thought. But the idea of being really unhealthy about approaching somebody, you pointed out too, this idea that attraction is subjective. There are different moments in history where people were attracted to bigger women or thinner women. And so for someone to come in and go like, you're this simply because my brain tells me that I'm attracted or not attracted, it's such a weird thing for people to be in that space, imposing their own personal ideas as if it's what we all generally agree to.
I think it's an attempt to throw their power. Because generally, and I would say, of course, not all men, it's not all men before they come in the comments. A lot of older men know that their words hold weight. And when they see a woman that they think, oh, wow, she's attractive, she's intelligent, she's powerful, I need to bring her down a few pegs by saying something negative, because I need to bring her down to my level, which is down here. And they say something negative to you and they expect you to internalize that and go, oh, maybe I should. That shit bounces off of me like a quarter off a firm ass, because they cannot make me feel bad about me. I did that for 20 years. There is nothing you can say to me that I haven't already said to myself, babe. So firstly, you're unoriginal. And secondly, your insecurity is showing.
So they're doing black magic and you've got a shield that reflects it.
That's right.
Love it.
Boom, roasted. I love that one. And then we had some comments about the people who are not on TikTok who are really responding to you. Is there anywhere else that you like to hang out? Or if TikTok was to go away, is there somewhere that you're going to hang out in the future?
So I do have an Instagram. It's Jordan Dwayne, I think is my handle on there. I do have a YouTube channel, but oh my gosh, I haven't used it in about 7 or 8 years. It's mainly just all my animal training stuff. There's no content like this on there. So TikTok's kind of the only place that you can find me for now. Although loads of my videos get shared onto Facebook. Dun, dun, dun.
Have you thought about writing a book?
I am writing a book. Yes.
Oh, I love it. You are damn intelligent and articulate, and
thank you.
You speak at a pace that I can grasp how fast your mind is moving and doing so on all cylinders. And kudos to you.
It's chaos in here.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask, is that part of your neurospicy brain?
Yes.
Because some people
neurodivergence is a superpower, but it is also a super hindrance at certain times. It really just depends which environment I'm in.
Yeah, because some people on TikTok, for me, I have to write things out because I'm quite slow to put things together, but I'm a good writer if I can write it out. And so it has been amazing to watch you answer these questions in real time as fast as someone talks on TikTok without a script. And so, yes, I can't wait. And please let us have you on the podcast again when you
I'd love
finish the book, and we can talk all about it, because wow, we've had so many people really respond, and we've had a lot of commenters who are watching this live who are just really loving this conversation, because I think for so many of us, I think for so many of our audience, there are people who really want to get closer to nature. They're especially women who are so curious about this world. It's a little overwhelming at first when you're first leaving high demand religion. But then, like, if you're coming from a religion, you have this BS meter. And so you're trying to navigate things, but then you feel like, oh, if I believe this thing, then I'm just going to have another faith crisis. And so it can keep people from exploring this space and the tools in this space because they're afraid. And I get this all the time when you have a really high BS meter because you're coming from religion. Anything that sounds like a truth claim is just an instant block. It's just an instant, I can't go there because I'm going to get hurt again. And so what I really love about your content and about this conversation is that I just know so many, especially women, who are really hungry for this, but have not been able to kind of navigate their way through it, especially with all of the woo that happens in this world that just feels really overwhelming when you're first leaving religion. And so I hope people to follow you, and I cannot wait for your book. And I just love your voice in the world. I think that my favorite combination of people, and this includes Bill and this includes you, are people who show up with their whole head and their whole heart. So their heart is there, the mystic, the feeling, the connection, all of that, but the head is still very present.
There are 3 places that I listen to. I'm sorry to interrupt. There are 3 places that I listen to, and I suggest that everybody else do the same. You got to listen to your head, your heart, and your gut, and they'll never tell you wrong.
I feel like I need more work on my gut space.
Listen to your gut. She'll never lie to you.
Yeah,
it's 100 times better than the systems I came from. That's for sure.
Yeah. I feel like my gut space is a little bit more of the 3 is the most quiet, because I'm still working on my body connection, because I've been more of a headspace person in the past, and that's the place that I most like to hang out.
You got to listen to all 3. They will tell you. They'll never steer you wrong. Sometimes they argue with one another, especially the head and the heart if you're in love. But your head, your heart, and your gut, they'll tell you. They'll tell you what's up. Listen to them.
I love it.
Really beautiful. Bill,
this has been one of my favorite conversations we've done.
Thanks,
this
guys.
is episode number 146. We've interviewed really like super well-known authors, scholars. This is one of the most enjoyable conversations, maybe the most enjoyable conversation I've had.
I'm so flattered. I fear
love
I don't know if I earned that title, but thank you so much.
Yes, you do. All right, so we will let you go, and just thank you so much, and everybody follow Jordan the Grey Witch, and thank you just for sharing your voice with us today.
Thank you all. Thank you so much for having me.
Take it easy, Jordan. Okay, give me a second to fix that. All right.
Oh, what'd you think?
Man, what an amazing conversation. I really enjoyed it. Really appreciated the chance to talk with her. She's really smart, is obvious. Grounded. Has a articulate answer for every question that was asked. She was like, her gut, mind, and heart were all connected. They were all very much, I didn't sense, I'm trying to think of use the right language. I didn't sense any disconnect in her. She just knows her stuff very well.
Yeah. So you can see why I saw her on TikTok and she was talking about, you know, atheist witchcraft. And then I started to watch a few of her videos, and you could see why I instantly was like, I have to talk to this woman. Like, I need to talk to her. I need to know her story. And it was so interesting at how early, you know, I was kind of expecting there to be like, oh, I was Catholic until I was 25, and then I had this blah, blah, blah. But she started this path very early on, which I found very interesting. That's a more rare story than we usually hear, because she, of course, then would have been earlier than the neo-pagan movement in general. And so that was really interesting. But I really, when she's talking, there's a part of me that's like, yeah, maybe I should be a witch. And I do love the witches in my life. And I do love how she's able to do it while maintaining intellectual honesty. But for me, my favorite places are places like this where I'm having conversations with people. And so I tend to be like, for you, like when she was talking about going out and grounding, do you feel more connected and awakened or spiritual or whatever word from having this conversation or going out into nature?
Ooh.
For me, it's an instant conversation.
Yeah, I think it's both, and they might be really close to equal.
Yeah.
But it's not just nature, it's the quiet, and it's the being called into a place in yourself where you're observing rather than constantly worried about what's going on in the past and future. It's, again, being present. Nature calls you to be present. Nature calls you to observe the universe all around you.
Nature definitely calls me into awe, especially like stars or eclipses or things like that. But I still think like the conversation and putting words to it is how I connect to it. And so I think that's why I never was really called to this path, because I want to talk about the thing and I enjoy and I connect more by talking about the thing than actually sometimes doing the nature thing. And so it's just not. So then it's just not my path. The conversation is my path. The reading and writing and having conversations with you is much more fulfilling to me. And it feels more like my path. But I loved everything that she said. And she was such an interesting person.
Yeah. I want to, so find business operator in the comments. And I'm going back to him because I'm just looking over it there and I'm seeing what he's saying. And he's and I can tell this. He's also a smart person. He's well read. His comments are very intelligent, but he represents a portion of humanity that really wants to stay in this logical space and wants everything to be termed a certain way. And the trouble is the terms he uses are also made up. They're terms that were assigned meaning sometime in the last 20,000 years or 10,000 years or 200 years. And when I said it was all myth, he's like, oh, fine, like myth, whatever, you know. But the reality is it is all myth. This is just energy bumping into each other, and we've come up with stories.
I feel like no one gets there right away. So like at first you are like, well, Mormonism is a myth. And then it's almost like you can come back to some of these words because you realize that, you know, all language, these are just mouth sounds, you know, that we put certain meaning to, but then the way that you're hearing them is not ever exactly the way that I'm saying them. And so it's almost like you come back. And this is, I think, when you make the move into mysticism, where at first it was like, no to all this language because it's not literally true. And then you kind of return to it because once you realize that this is a game and we're all playing and we're just building sandcastles,
Yeah.
then you can come back to some of this religious language with a little bit more room than maybe in the past. At least that's true for me, that I'm able to play in spaces that were way too religious language for me to hang out in maybe 5 years ago. But now I can kind of do that translation and understand what they're saying and still make a connection, even though that's not the word that I would use or whatever.
Yeah. My wife recently bought a tarot deck, and she has been researching with the book that came with it, as well as outside of that, how to be a tarot reader. And so she did a reading for me about a week and a half ago. And more than that, maybe 3 weeks ago. And there was something else going on in my life that was a little bit of turmoil. She lays down 3 cards. There was like the main card, and then there were the 2 cards supporting it, right? And she just read straight from the book, and my mind easily picked in my life the thing that was going on that connected to these cards, and it called me. And again, I don't mean this in any magical way. I just mean that my consciousness was aware of the direction these cards were pointing my thoughts, and I thought through what these cards were suggesting. I went into my gut, and I knew that I was handling the situation healthy and that I was doing the right thing. And I walked away from the tarot reading feeling reassurance that I had done what I needed to do and that I didn't need to worry about what anybody else could do about the situation because I had handled it right. And I've been part of astrology readings with Gina Colvin. I've been part of Enneagram conversations with Jana Spangler and Gina as well. I've had all these conversations where we're using a thing that some people believe is magical as the framework for having a real conversation about life and what works and what doesn't, and pointing you to thinking about thoughts that you wouldn't have thought if I hadn't laid these 3 cards down. Anyway.
I do think so. When I think of like a cult or paganism or witch, I see all these tools as ways to tap into your intuition. And your intuition is wise in the sense that, you know, we've talked before on this podcast about how our conscious mind is really limited in the information that we can take in, but our subconscious is taking in all kinds of things and has all kinds of things to say. So my favorite deck that I've gotten, I've tried it like a few, I just wanted to play around, but my favorite deck was this one, which is archetype cards, and where it gets into just kind of characters that you see often in mythology or Jungian psychology. And you can go through these. And then, yeah, you just essentially have a conversation with yourself and see what comes up with any of these cards. And your subconscious will fill in those gaps. And then you can learn and you can set an intention. And there's nothing magical about any of that. I certainly don't.
It seems like it's such an easy thing to recognize that when we said alchemy, we didn't mean turning tin into gold.
Yeah.
When we said magic, we didn't mean an empty hat and pulling a rabbit out. When we said witch, we didn't mean someone casting a spell over a cauldron and suddenly somebody turns into a toad.
But to be fair, I do think that spiritual bypassing and human superstition does take these tools and like ramp up the superstition, right? So most of the tarot people I know are people who probably really actually do believe that the universe spun in such a way that you only got this card today, right?
Yeah.
Same thing with horoscope people, right? Most of the horoscope people I know are not doing this for just inner work. There's just a lot of spiritual bypassing going on. So maybe
but we could prove that wrong. If you did a tarot reading right now, and then you did another one, and then you did another one, and by the time you were done, every single card got used. Every single time we did tarot reading, we would have gotten meaning from it.
Yeah. So we can prove this out, but then, you know, if you have a need for these things to be true because they give you a sense of order in the chaos, then you're going to be clinging to some truth claims there because you haven't sat with uncertainty yet, is the honest truth, which is what we see when people leave religion. They're still afraid of death. They're still afraid of uncertainty. They're still afraid of meaninglessness. And then they find the world of the woo, and there's spiritual bypassing and tools and security blankets and truth claims for all of those needs. And you just kind of fill them right back in instead of actually doing the inner work that causes you to turn to religion in the first place, right?
Yeah, I love it.
But what was I going to say? There was one more thing. Oh, so I did do some of this work, but I found that the most powerful, if someone's really looking for ways to tap into their intuition and a tool for that, I think my favorite is doing guided meditations. You can find them anywhere. It's a very common guided meditation where you imagine someone that you see as wise, some person like who would be at the table of someone wise and has your well-being in mind, someone that you would really trust to give a smart answer. And you really imagine them and you go through this guided meditation and you ask them and you allow them to answer. And it's like your own mind will fill in that gap of like, what would this person say in this situation? And you can actually kind of have this conversation between your conscious mind and your subconscious mind as you go through this guided meditation. And for whatever reason, again, for me, it's conversation, having that conversation with a person that I truly believe is dead, is literally dead, have zero belief that they are answering my question about my silly little life, whatever I'm thinking about. But the actual conversation in my head is helpful. Walking into that space is helpful. And again, it goes back to that jump between cynicism about everything and going into this mystic space where, well, okay, it's not true, but is there a tool here that I can use? And starting to do some of that work. So really fun conversation.
Yeah, even that, like you're pointing to it, the practice we had last week where we invited our dead ancestors and our living, right? To
Super
come
powerful.
sit at a
we
table
were both
with
crying.
us. And I know that my mom who, sat at the table, I knew my mom was dead and her real essence and memory and mind and thoughts wasn't there. My brain had my mom sit at the table and it was all in my head. And I was able to get a message from her and all the other people that were sitting at the table, some of them are living, who were in the middle of making their lunch 200 miles away.
Yeah.
It's not real.
Yeah.
But it works. And if it works, it's still rational and functional.
Yes, if it works, then there's something there. Like you can't say, okay, it's like this is the conversation that I have with atheists where, atheists will, a 4-year-old will pick up a phone and say hello, and we all go, we grab a banana and we say hello. And I feel like sometimes atheists are too quick to say, well, the phone's not plugged into the wall. It's like, we know the phone is not plugged into the wall, but there's something else going on here. And so if there is something that was useful to you in that situation, then it is something in some ways is real. And if it changes how you show up in the world, then it is something kind of real, even if it's not capital R real or capital T true, right?
Totally.
Anyway, really nuanced space.
This tarot stuff, are you pretty good at doing tarot readings?
I'm okay. I tend to use these archetype ones because I understand archetypes.
We ought
and mythology.
To do that sometime in an episode.
Okay,
soon.
maybe I'll give you a reading. For anyone who wants to do spiritual direction with me, I can do some of these guided meditations in session. We can pull out cards if that's something that you want to do. Sometimes this just comes out in conversation, right? So the conversation, the way that I'm asking questions that you haven't thought about is that kind of mirror that looks inside, and you can even be surprised at how you answer it. So a lot of that is happening in conversation if you were to do a spiritual direction session with me. But yeah, sometimes people will ask for that, or they'll ask for a quote, or they'll ask for a guided meditation. And so long as you're not forcing me to believe anything that I don't believe, but you want some tools to help you want to have these conversations to kind of figure out where you want to go in your life and what's calling you and all these kind of big questions that we have. These are the things that you do as a spiritual director. And I do most of it through conversation. Yeah.
Love it.
Fun stuff. All right. What do we got? What do we got next week? Next week we're going to discuss Maslow's hierarchy, but the unpublished peak of that pyramid. Everybody's kind of learned the pyramid somewhere in Psych 101 or whatever. But before he died, he was working on one above self-actualization called self-transcendence. So we're going to be talking about that next week. And then the week after, we have a Zen Buddhist who's going to come talk to us, a female Zen Buddhist who really has a lot to say about sexual abuse in the Buddhist community and patriarchy in Buddhism. And I'm really excited to hear her story too. So if you enjoyed this conversation, please donate to the podcast so we can really continue to bring on these voices and have these conversations that really aren't happening anywhere else like this.
Yeah, you've got the next 2 weeks lined up. I'm super excited about as well. Yeah, folks, go to almostawakened.org. Drop us a $10 bill a month or something. We'll just keep having these really cool conversations, having really cool guests like Jordan the Gray Witch. And we'll just keep talking about things that help us all to have a more grounded in a wider base of knowledge that helps us show up in the world a little different than we were the week before.
Yeah, it goes back to that spiral that we have as the image for this podcast. We're going deeper within and we're connecting more outside, going continually back and forth. And that's what I call spirituality. So
great job,
always
man.
Lovely talking with you, Bill, and have a good week. Thank you, Heather, for donating. Really appreciate it.
Sweet. Have a great day, everybody.
All right. Bye.
This has been another Almost Awakened episode. Check us out at almostawakened.org, where you can check out past episodes, make a donation to keep this podcast running, email us a question or comment, or find out more about the resources shared in today's episode. For coaching opportunities or extra support, visit NoNonsenseSpirituality.com to meet with Certified Spiritual Director Brittany Hartley.